Greetings and welcome to Be My Guest. Today I'm honored to have Mohsen Harandi, all the way from Pennsylvania, to discuss his lovely book called Midnight Connections. He's come a long time ago to this country from Iran, am I right?
That's right.
And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And as an engineer, takes us somewhere altogether different. I'd like to read a little bit that I think the book is about.
Yes.
Spirituality can take us where science cannot. I learned this from Hafez, Saadi, Rumi, and Khayyam, and experienced it in Midnight Connection. That's the book you've written.
That's correct.
So this is a book of poems.
Yes.
Which is very, very deep, I would say.
Yes.
And it's very interesting, and it's so I'd like to know how you got to this stage of thinking of writing poetry.
Yes. Well, I was introduced to poetry at age 14 by my grandmother, and I learned about Hafez, who is the most beloved poet in Iran. And I just fell in love with that since childhood. But I was writing some Persian poetry in younger age before I came to US. And that stopped actually as I went to school and studied engineering. But what didn't stop was I was reading every single night Persian poetry, especially Hafez, Rumi, Saadi, and Khayyam. And they have been guide in my life. And I came to this country essentially having nobody, but I did have the books.
The books.
And that really helped me throughout life. And I can go over some example poems.
But before you go into the example of the poems, it's very interesting as a student. How did you find the time as an engineering student, not just any degree? It's demanding in itself, as I understand it.
I guess one of time management is extremely important to me.
Oh, yes.
And especially, I take every task in a way that if it is necessary, I try to do it perfect. Otherwise, I just do 80-20. And I do understand that doing engineering, a lot of times we have been taught in schools to focus on analytics of that and the numbers. But I believe there is something in engineering that sometimes are forgotten, is the intuition and soul in it. And as I became an engineer, I didn't read the books of engineering like a scientist. I read it like a poet.
Oh,
and I tried to grasp them by my soul to the extent possible. So I actually am not a typical engineer. I do relatively little number crunching, and I solve the problems typically by just common sense or intuition. So it has been helpful in that regard. So there is actually a synergy between the two. And a lot of engineering relates to how you imagine and how you innovate. And poetry gets your imagination open up. So they're kind of hand in hand.
The reason I ask that, because if there's a youngster today getting into engineer or any degree or any school, trying to figure out how do I do or get hold of doing my passion, what's my passion?
Yes.
And I think you've answered it beautifully.
Well, because I went through that myself. I didn't want to become an engineer. No way. I wanted to be a poet. And my brother, who was my guardian at the time, said absolutely no. And my principal told me that there is a synergy between poetry and science, and you will find that. And I actually did.
Did you thank your teacher?
At the time, I always thanked whatever advice they gave me, but I didn't really understand that he was right at the time.
As youngsters, we never
That's
think anybody is right. We know it best.
That's right.
As we grow older, we definitely
Yes.
grow wiser.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you've chosen this kind of poetry. It's so spiritual, and yet romantic. It's very, very nice. I like the way you place the conversations or the poetry, the way it runs from one into the other, starting from birth to death, in my understanding of the whole thing.
Yes, it actually discusses pre-birth as well.
Right.
And after death as well. And, the spirituality and romanticism are the two ingredients of Persian poetry, classical Persian poetry, that they always go together. So to me, that's not abnormal, but I think it's rare in English language.
Yes.
And I'm hoping I have brought something a little bit different.
Yes, well, with that, I'd like you to read some of your poetry, like page 73, Come and Rest Your Head on My Shoulder.
Yes.
I give you the opportunity to just do that, or you want to do your Farsi one, I leave it up to you.
I like to start actually by a Hafiz poem.
Okay.
Because a lot of my book has been inspired by Persian poetry, and one of the problems is I cannot read the audience the Persian poetry as it is.
Right.
And they understand it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to translate it. And translation always comes short. But I'm going to also read it in Farsi so they get the feel and the rhythm and the rhymes in it. Okay. So I'm going to just read 2 lines from Hafiz. I first do the translation. It says, for years heart was asking me for the Holy Grail. For what it had, it was asking others. And unaware of heart, God accompanied him always. He just didn't know and asked, where are you? Where are you? Now, I read it in Farsi, and to me it's much prettier.
You could actually read it with the language, actual language. And
that's right. سالها دل طلب جام جم از ما می کرد وانچه خود داشت ز بیگانه تمنا می کرد بی دلی در همه احوال خدا با او بود او نمی دیدش و از دور خدایا می کرد. So that is Hafiz, and believe it or not, in my life, it has really guided me how to live. And when I came here at age 18, I essentially had nobody. And when you're kind of alone and seeing so many new things and so many challenges, life can be difficult. And I have written this poem at 4:40 a.m. one night, woke up and wrote it, and I rarely write dark poems, but it started fairly dark. In the dark alley of life, where on every curve a sinkhole opens its mouth to the wonder of unknowns that can take us to the dead end of ponder with thunder of blunder, failing path, helpless times, organic low points, underground with no ground, searching hands, useless eyes, spinning head, feeling dead, left with no air, under density of darkness. I rely on an ancient torch with timeless flames that never die from Hafez's heart that was passed to us. That's
Brilliant.
That's the kind of influence he has had,
Excellent.
making my life brighter. We foreigners come to this country and we bring our own cultures in, and the culture actually helps us to stay positive and be useful. I like to also go into another poetry related to Persian culture, not necessarily the poems, and the culture itself has been quite helpful in everything I have gone through in life. And the culture essentially tells you have low expectations or no expectations, but always have good in heart. And this poem, I'm gonna read it now for you. Come and rest your head on my left shoulder, and let the tears wash pain away. I know you tried, but who said you can control whatever you decide? Let me hold you tighter. Listen to the heart of your elder to find the rhythm that foster peace and harmony in life. It says, think good, behave good, and do good. Then be happy with the outcome. You did the best you could. Don't expect that it would turn out the way you imagined, since you learn through surprises.
That gives somebody a whole life history of how to live in a good. I love the that poetry is so profound.
Thank you.
It gives there's a lot of meaning, a lot of depth into that.
Yes, thank you so much.
And so we went straight into the poetry and all of that, but we didn't actually talk about how you got into the actual Midnight Connections, our lovely cover, and I can say anybody reading this will have a lot of emotions running through them. It's so profound and so brilliant.
Thank you. The poems actually are not really mine. They came to me.
Right, that's what you said, yeah.
And they came mainly middle of night.
Oh, that's why it's Midnight Connection.
Yes, and they came very suddenly. And it wasn't one connection, it was many connections. One of the connections was with Hafez's spirit. It happened to me extremely suddenly. And that really shook me and made me actually quite frightened. And the connections continued with others, and there are many different connections that I can talk about, but I just pick one and I can take you through that. And if you look at the front page of my book, it's very spiritual, romantic. This is actually done by my wife, Olga Harandi. If you actually go to olgaharandi.com, you're not going to find this because she has promised me never selling this.
She's an artist?
Pardon me?
She's an artist?
She's an artist, and she's also a poet.
Okay.
She was a geologist, and she decided one day, I'm just going to focus on art. And she had produced this well before I wrote the poems, and I always loved this painting because of its spirituality. And I selected that for the front of the book. And I like to take you through one of the nights, December 14th. I went to bed that night around 9:45 p.m. And the first poems started coming after an hour, and they kept coming. That night I wrote about 17 poems. And these poems were kind of shocking and tiring all at the same time. And I read you the second poem of that night that came around 11 p.m. And I was writing every 20 minutes approximately. In Iran, when somebody is very high, you kiss their hands. Spirituality, they may be high or they may be your grandparents. And at that night, I had Hafez's soul with me. And this is what I wrote to him. I kissed your hand in the delight of your presence, mesmerizing all my senses to the limit of never-ending border between the reality and dream. Oh, how lucky I am to sit here and feel you with all sense of skin growing from my heart to the land of never covered before. Oh, how lucky I am to kiss your hand without knowing how I got here and where I am going. Yet your hand is the guide I trust to give to it all I have and the sanity that used to be me. Guide me to the unknown that stars are blinking on. Help me reach to the height that obvious becomes the word for this vague world. Show me how you unfold. Make me open, aware of the silence, romance of your presence. Keep me silent forever in the praise of the beauty that you possess. And I go to bed again and wake up, and another poem comes. This time the poem refers to Hafez to write through me. One of the regrets I always had about Hafez's life was the fact that he wrote so few poems. He wrote only 400 some poems. And I always wished he had produced more. So I write this to him. Write me your poems that bring a sense of heaven back home to me. How can I make you write what the world has been anxiously waiting to hear? The soft lake of heaven's waves washing ashore, flowers of love in colorless, rhythmically self-bounded bouquets that open my nose to breath of God. Let me feel all the intangibles that sparkle from your mysterious presence in present time to confirm to me existence exists. And there is a reason to keep my eyes open when no hope is allowed around. and darkness has covered the light that used to shine 8 centuries ago. 8 centuries ago is when Hafiz was writing poems.
So you've been really blessed.
This experience was so incredible, especially for a scientist, no matter how spiritual you are. And it is frightening. And the next poem actually talks about that. And you can see how frightened I was. And actually, when I was writing these poems, each one took 1 minute to write. And
So it's like somebody else written through you.
exactly. And I was writing them without knowing where they are heading to. So you can imagine as I went through this poem, how it turned on me. And I just traveled with it, just like a beautiful journey. Dear, there is nothing normal about you. I am so frightened, but too excited to pay attention to my fears that are helpless in the majesty of your rise. Poems flow when the airwaves are disturbed by the gentle breeze of your soft presence. I'm dumbfounded and can't believe my eyes, can't breathe of love, and can't cry without holding you in my arms to get the ultimate comfort in life. No need for witnesses. I know the truth. No need for questions. I'm totally clear that you are the one that blows my mind away and makes my soul dance in melody. I love you deep, so extremely deep, that the tiny yellow canary of your soul, having a white stripe and wing, started to sing me opera in Italian. By opera in Italian, I was wondering what I meant. And after reading this poem many, many, many times, I realized for Hafiz, who wrote poems in Farsi, writing poems in modern English is like singing opera in Italian.
I see how you make this connection between the modern and ancient times together, woven so nicely in your poetry.
Thank you.
And it's and I'm sure that will appeal more to the modern readers too, figuring out it's very deep. The poetries are very, very deep, and you can see there's a lot of sense of spirituality in it.
Yes. I don't consider them mine, but I'm so happy that they came through me. And the next poem I'm going to read you that night, it came at 3:32 a.m. This poem is really extremely deep.
So this is basically when you fall asleep, you're like having a dream and just get up and just put your thoughts down.
No, it's actually worse than that. If it was a dream, I would just sleep. The first 3-4 words come, and until you don't get up, they don't stop repeating themselves. Then you say, I'm better off getting up and writing it, because writing it takes a minute or two, but fighting it will take a very long time. So you can imagine I reluctantly was getting up. This was like the 15th poem that night.
Oh, wow.
And very sleepy. And this comes. And what is fascinating about this poem to me, it talks about the true spirituality and love and considers surfaces creating the materialistic world. And it also relates to Hafiz and how he expressed himself in spirituality. I read this poem. I wasn't serious about publishing the book until my wife typed the first 50 pages and called it From Angels. And then I kind of felt obligated because that was true. It did come from angels. I wasn't thinking about that. And then I said, well, let me just try it on some people and see if they can relate to it. And I read it. The first poem was this one that I read to someone. It was to a 26-year-old American lady who was the daughter of my friend. She was visiting us. She was getting ready for a wedding that she had. And I read her this poem, and I was really shocked that she cried, and she said, can you read this at my wedding? And I was very surprised because this poem has the word death in it, has the word Hafiz, but she realized how it was talking about deep love. So I read you this one. The goal is to melt any single surface with the warmth of love, to destroy barriers created to separate us from day one, when we were one with only one.
Wow.
The delusion of surfaces creates the elusive reflection of a mirror's lies that distort our soul's eyes. The birds know this and sing at dawn to wake us from the nightmare of night, to see what is bright, shining all the right senses of the sight that has no surface for our eyes to face. Rhythms know this, dancing around with all the sound toward the final found, to become one with all that's there, away from noise.
Well, it was such a pleasure this morning. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And bringing the word out to let everybody know what you've been through. And, much appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
And again, it's called Midnight Connections. And how can we get a hold of the book?
That's on Amazon and local bookstores, on Barnes & Noble. It's online. You can just go Google it. Midnight Connections by Harandi.
Thank you for watching. And as always, it's available at ActonTV.org. And any questions or answers, you can write to flavorfuleats@gmail.com. From your host, Humsha Naidoo. Bye-bye till we meet again. Thank you.